Steve Jobs said that creativity is having dots to join. That's what I love about TED. Every time I listen to a talk, it gives me more dots to join. It makes me think different. But what if we need to think differently to overcome a challenge or an uncertainty that we face? Now, people say that creativity is about thinking outside the box. Others, that it's all about being creative inside the box. But what if there is no box? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. That if you can realize what that box is, and you can remove it, you can unlock unlimited streams of creativity. Now, Henry Ford said that thinking is the hardest work there is, which is probably why so few of us engage in it. So I'd like us to do some thinking today. I'm going to ask you to interact with me today. I'm going to start by asking a question. In your entire educational life, from the moment you started school to the moment you finished, how many hours would you say you spent learning mathematics? How many hours? Somebody throw out some ideas. How many hours? 1, 200. More than 200. 7,000. If you went to university and studied mathematics, yeah, probably. You would have spent thousands of hours learning mathematics, learning English, learning science. Let me ask you another question. How many hours did you spend during that same period learning about metacognition? So thinking about thinking, learning how to learn, learning how to create. Who had Creativity 101 lessons? Anyone out there? 0. Very, very few. I saw a few hands, but it's very few. Now, therein lies the rub, as Shakespeare would say, because our educational system is really good at feeding us information. It helps us to assimilate knowledge, and that is really important. But, and it's a very big but, knowledge is no longer power. The use of knowledge is no longer power. It's the creation of new knowledge that's power. So if we can help people to create new ideas and new knowledge, that's where the power really is. In 1968, George Land was given the task of creating a creativity test to help NASA find highly creative engineers. Now, 1968, NASA was at the height of the space race. They needed to find some amazing people to help them. So they created this test, but interestingly what they did was to put 1,600 5-year-olds through the same test. What percentage of those 5-year-olds do you think scored in the highly creative range? So give me some numbers. What percentage? 80, 75? Yeah, we all know it's going to be a high percentage, but did you think it would be this high? 98% of those 5-year-olds scored in the highly creative range. Now, they tested the same children 5 years later. What percentage now scored in the highly creative range? 60, bit optimistic, this group. 30%. Again, 5 years later, 15 years old, what percentage now scored? 2%, 12%. This is quite depressing, isn't it? They also put 250,000 people over the age of 25, and that's probably most of us here, through the same test. What percentage of those scored in the highly creative range? 2%. 2%. Now just think about why this happens. Just think about it. The 5-year-olds scored 98% in the highly creative range. You don't have to tell a 5-year-old to think of outside the box. They have no concept of what thinking outside the box is. In fact, if you give them a box and tell them it's a box, they'll say, no, it's not. It's an airplane. It's a bus. It's a car. It's a suit. It's a galaxy. They have no comprehension of what the box is. The box starts to form as we get older. It's made up of our beliefs, our habits, and mainly our assumptions. It's these little programs that run around in our head that tell us what is possible and what isn't possible. And they're good things because they make sense of the world. But sometimes you need to turn those off. Now, I'd like us to do a little bit of a creativity test. So in your bags, you'll have the guide and you'll have some pens. So if you could get those out. And I really want you to do this. You need to do the test. So if you could just get something to write on, get a pen out. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to do this creativity test. And we'll see how you do as an audience. Okay, the test is very simple. The test is to come up with as many non-uses of a paperclip that you can think of, starting now. So anything you just can't use a paperclip for, non-uses of a paperclip. How many non-uses of a paperclip can you come up with in 60 seconds? Okay, pens down, if you could just count up how many you've come up with. Let's see how good you are. How many had between 0 and 2? A few. How many had between 3 and 8? The majority. How many had more than 8? Okay, that's pretty good. Can you give me some examples? What do you think is a really good non-use of a paperclip? Boil an egg. Okay, boil an egg. Who else had a non-use that was better than that? Food. Food. Ride a bike. Okay, we've got food, boil an egg, and ride a bike. Food, boil an egg, and ride a bike. What I'm going to ask you to do now, in groups, speak to the people next to you, is imagine that you're on a debating team. And unfortunately, you've been given the unenviable task of debating that you can use a paperclip as food, that you can use a paperclip to boil an egg, and that you can use a paperclip as a bike. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to come up with how you can use a paperclip to do all those things. So speak to the people next to you and come up with an answer in 60 seconds. Okay, everyone, if I could get your attention. How can we use a paperclip as food? We could grate it on pasta. So instantly we could use it. We could have the paperclip, we could grate it. Perhaps we get the added benefit of getting extra iron into our diet. So we can use a paperclip as food. What about boil an egg? How can we boil an egg with a paperclip? Oh, so we just heat the paperclip, put it into the egg. Over time, it will heat the egg and it will boil the egg. So we can use a paperclip to boil an egg. What about ride a bike? So we could magnetize it and stick it to the bike. How else could we use it? So we could use lots of paperclips together to actually make a bike out of it. So actually, we can use a paperclip to do all of those things. We can. Now, I do this creativity test all over the world, and quite often, somebody in the audience will say, Chris, yeah, that's good fun, but let's face it, that's stupid. You're never going to use a paperclip to boil an egg. You're never going to use a paperclip to ride a bike. Let me tell you why I'm telling you this. Let's just imagine we went back in time. So it's 1928, it's September 1928, and I was to do this activity with you again. But this time, rather than a paperclip, I said to you, right, give me the non-uses of mold. Absolutely nothing, something you just can't do with mold. And somebody might have come up with the idea, well, you can never use mold to save the lives of millions of people in the future. And then a few weeks later, Alexander Fleming would come back from his vacation and all of a sudden invent penicillin. The whole point of this is that to be creative, you have to have an everything is possible mindset. Just because you see something as it is doesn't mean it has to be that way. You have to challenge those assumptions. Let's look at some other examples. Sort of real-world examples. I'm just going to pick out two of these, but if we looked at Kodak, I mean, how could Kodak go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy? I mean, seriously, Kodak. And when I ask people that, they will all say to me, oh, it's the digital camera. You know, the digital camera put Kodak into that position. But this is Steve Sasson up here from Kodak, who actually invented the first digital camera. Now, the problem they had, the box that they had, the assumptions that they had, was that they were in the film business. That to make money, to grow market share, they had to sell film. So they couldn't see past that to see that they could have taken advantage of being first in that digital marketplace. Coca-Cola. Do many of you know why Coca-Cola was called Coca-Cola Classic for so long? Have you ever thought about that? You know, why was it called Coca-Cola Classic? In 1985, Coca-Cola did the largest taste test that's ever been done. 200,000 people were given a blind taste test of new Coke and the existing Coke. And the data was absolutely clear. People preferred new Coke. It tasted, you know, so much better. This was black and white. You could not fail. So they released new Coke. It was an absolute disaster. People were literally hoarding the existing code. They were buying just loads of it, putting it in their basement, putting it away. They made the assumption that data always tells the full story. And we all do this. We look at the data. Data's safe. Data tells us this is the right thing to do. They looked at the data. They thought that they were safe to make this call. But they missed the fact that people were connected to the original Coke. They didn't want to lose the Coke they'd been drinking all of their life. They'd had an emotional connection to it. So they made the assumption that the data would tell the full story. Luckily, they turned it around very, very quickly. Another example of this. I want you to imagine in your heads that we go back to the day before the iPhone was released. So you don't even know what that the iPhone is going to come out. You have to get that out of your mind. And I want you, for 1 minute, to talk to the people around you and discuss, well, what were the main market drivers in that industry at the time? What was Motorola and Nokia concentrating on to get us to buy more phones at the time? So 1 minute, discuss with the people next to you. Okay, so let's look at this. What were the market drivers? Were phones getting bigger or smaller? Smaller. Okay, were phones getting more affordable, or were they getting more expensive? Was battery life getting better or worse? It was getting better. It was getting better. What about signal strength? Were phones better in terms of, actually being able to get good signal strength? Absolutely. These were key market drivers in the industry at the time. Then all of a sudden you had somebody like Steve Jobs that had no box. He didn't look at those assumptions. So, okay, was the iPhone small? No. It was one of the biggest phones on the marketplace. It must have had a great battery life then, the first iPhone 1, did it? No? Okay. It must have been really affordable. No, it was one of the most expensive. And the signal strength must have been brilliant. And it wasn't, not even up to the iPhone 4 when you couldn't put your hand in a certain place. So Steve Jobs was not afraid to break all the rules. He just removed the box. He didn't allow those assumptions to control what he wanted to invent. He wanted to look at something totally different and look at the success that came from that. So in summary, what you need to be able to do to remove the box is just challenge those assumptions. Just think about the things that are running around inside your head that might be dictating what you're doing. If you're in business, for instance, and it happens to me all the time, they say, Chris, we need to increase sales. Can you come and help us increase sales? So I take that away from them. I say, well, what if you can't increase sales? Just imagine, what would you do? And then they might say, well, okay, we will upsell our existing customers. Okay, let's take that away. What if you can't do that? What would you now do? So it just takes away the assumptions. And sometimes you can even reverse them. So for instance, instead of finding new customers, how can you lose your customers? You'll be surprised that looking at the problem in that perspective will throw up things you hadn't even thought of. You have to remove the box. You have to. People come to me and say, Chris, I've got a great business idea, but I just haven't got the resources to make it happen. Well, imagine you never get the resources. How would you make it happen? There's an absolutely awesome TED talk on a teenager that came up with a test for pancreatic cancer. Nearly 5 million people have watched that TED video. Now, he didn't have the resources. He went to Home Depot and got the parts from a DIY store and created a test for pancreatic cancer. It's incredible. So the key thing here is remove the box. You must remove the box by challenging your thinking. People say if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. But in today's fast-paced world, that just isn't true. If you keep doing what you've always done, you'll get left way behind. Standing still means you're going backwards. So think without the box. Thank you.